Hello guys, welcome back to another tutorial on complete .NET Web APIs. So today what I'll be covering is an interesting pattern which is called CQRS. The full form goes as Command Query Responsibility Segregation. Okay, and along with this, it is mostly used with a library called MediatR. So MediatR is basically like an intermediary between your controller and the application layer, wherein it forwards the requests to the application layer, where the CQRS pattern can then take it on from there. Okay. So now what is CQRS all about? So as in the previous tutorials, we have completed our API and we have made interactions with the database, wherein the controller, so if we just check the company's controller makes call using the unit of work pattern. It makes calls to the database queries and gets you the data, or in case of writing to the database, it updates the database, like for example, add company, update company, etc. Okay. So now CQRS is a pattern wherein we can segregate the responsibilities of writing to the database and responsibility of reading from database. Okay. So usually in database terminology, a command means when you are writing to the database. Whenever there is a write functionality, it is called as a command. And whenever there is a read functionality from the database, it is called as a query. So that's how the full form is: command query responsibility segregation. So with CQRS, what we do is we divide the flow of path in two ways. One is for commands and one is for queries. So commands are nothing but write operations on the database, and queries are nothing but read operations. Like for example, add company, update company will be commands, and get company by ID and get companies will be queries for you. Okay, another example I can give you is, consider this kind of interface wherein it is I stack of t, and the stack has three operations, basically push, pop, and teak. Okay, now if we want to represent this in the form of CQRS, we can, so if you see, the push and pop are basically write operations wherein they change the state of the database, whereas peek just reads the data from the database. So this becomes a query and these become commands. So we can then split it as two different objects in the form of I command stack, which has push and pop, and I query stack, which has peek. Okay. Now, being that said, let's start you are making use of CQRS and also the MediatR library. So it's a NuGet package. So MediatR is nothing but what it will do is it will take the request. So if you see the controller, it will take the request from the controller action method, and it will forward it to a handler. So in CQRS, we will be implementing a command and a command handler, and also a query and a query handler. So the job of the MediatR will be to just send the request or delegate the request to the handler. So another benefit of using this pattern would be the entire chunk of this business logic, which is just lying in the presentation layer that is inside the controller, will be moved to the application layer, where all this can just be done inside the either the command handler or query handler, and then just a response is given by the MediatR, which can then be used in the controller action method. So we are also reducing the fat controllers to make it a little slimmer. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing what I would do is in the application layer, we have common and configuration. I will, for the sake of this tutorial, what I will do is I will work on the company's controller to show you how we can integrate the CQRS and mediator pattern. So first, what I'll do is I'll create a folder. This is how I like to structure the project when using CQRS and clean architecture. So I'll create a folder, and since the controller is company's controller, I will call this as a company module. Okay, I will name this as company module, and inside this module, I will create two new folders, one for commands and one for queries. Commands and the other one for queries. Okay, so all our commands and queries will be residing here. So similarly, we have another controller for employees. So we'll create another folder called employee modules, and inside that will be commands and queries which are associated to the employee module, which are associated to the employees. Okay, so now inside commands, what we'll do is let's have a look at the controller first. So first we'll try to tackle the write operations, that is add company, update company, delete company. So we'll have to move this logic to commands and command handlers. So the way we do it is, let me first add a command. So since this is add company, I'll name the command also as add company command. Okay. So let me just add it as, I'll create a new class. I will call it as add company command. Okay. So now another thing which we would use here is, instead of using a class, we would be using records. So records are recently used in the recent or later versions of C#, the record type is used. So the thing with records is that, like classes, they are so unlike classes, they are immutable. So once you create a record, it can't be updated. So that's the reason we'll be using records in place of classes for commands. And similarly, in the previous tutorials, we've already created some request DTOs and response DTOs. So these request and response DTOs also, we'll change it to records in place of just creating classes. Okay. So now, since we have created add company command here, so let me go ahead, add company command. So let me change it to a record first. Public record add company command. And so basically what this will do is, command will just take the request of the company. So if you see here, this is company request. So what we'll do is go to definition. So it has name, address, and country. So we will, so this is how we declare the record. So we'll just take in the three inputs, that is the name, address, and country. And our record is ready. But let's also introduce the mediator now, and we'll show you how we can use that. So what we'll do is, we will go to NuGet and add the mediator package. So let me just find it on NuGet. So let's search for MediatR and download the latest version of MediatR. So latest is 12.1.1 as of now. So I will just install that. And once MediatR is installed, yeah. So what I'll do is, now this is a command, and that command will inherit from I request. So I request belongs to the mediator interface. So it is like a signature of the command. So what the command will be uh, returning. Okay, so in our case, so if we just check here, so it's the add company command. So this functionality, what we are doing is accepting company request, which has these three parameters. So that's the reason we have added these three parameters here. And what it produces is nothing but so if you see this here, add company. So if you see the add company here, so what we would expect out from here is just the company ID. So if you see here, it is adding and giving you the company ID, which is a string. So that's why the return type, we'll take it as a string. So I'll use it as I request of string. And now for string, we'll just include the mediator. Okay. So once we have created the add company record, let's also change this to a record instead of this. Just change it to name, address, and country. So we've changed the class to a record now. Public record. Okay, so now company request also we've changed it to a record. So we might have some errors where we had used classes. So we'll build it and check if we have any errors, and we'll replace it accordingly. So let's try to build it. Okay, so we have an error here. Yeah, so that is in the example provider for Swagger, which we had done. So let's change this also to uh, record. So when you are supplying the record, you just need to pass in the parameters, just like a method call. Okay, now I think we are good. So once we have created the command, now the next thing what we'll do is we will create the command handler. So let's go back to where we had started. That is the add company command. Now the next thing what I'll do is I'll add a new class, and I'll add the handler, which is add company command handler. Okay, add this, let's remove this, declare it as public sealed. And now to make it a handler, we need to inherit from I request handler, which also belongs to mediator. Now this request handler takes in two arguments. One is which command it needs to handle. So we'll put in the name of the command which we have created, that is the add company command. Add company command, and the return type was string in our case. So this will be the command. Now let's try to implement whatever is necessary. So it has defined a handle method where we can handle the command. So we'll just handle that. Also, we will need to add in a constructor to have the dependencies injected. So if you see, since we are moving this functionality of add to the handler, what we'll need to do is we'll also need to inject the unit of work, which is injected by default by the framework. So we just need to specify it here. We'll just copy this from here, put it in the constructor, and then we'll create the private field, assign it here. Yeah, so now what we can do is we can just use this. So let's go back to companies. What we can do here now is unit of work. So let's go back to the controller and let's move this functionality from here and move it to the handler. So now what the controller was doing, all that business logic, we've moved it here. So now instead of this, we just need to say request.name, request.name, and again the same thing here, request.name, request.country. Okay. So we are done here, and what we need to return is the company ID. So let's return the company ID. So this is done. We are ready with the handler and we are ready with the command. So now one thing we are missing is the dependency injection. So let's do that. So let's go to configuration of the application layer, that is the dependency injections. And here we need to add or register the mediator. So services dot add mediator, and then let's say config and config dot register services from assembly, and then we can just take in the assembly, that is type of dependency injection. So it will take the assembly where this class belongs. So for that, what we'll do is dependency injection, type of dependency injection dot assembly. Okay, so we have now registered the mediator. Now the final step we need to do is just need to inject the mediator here, that is inside the controller. So if we just go to the company's controller, we go to company's controller and we can just include private read-only I mediator mediator. Yeah, so now if I just check mediator, go to the definition. So it is inheriting from iSender and publisher. So keeping the interface segregation principle in mind, let's just use iSender because we just need to send the request to the handlers. So we'll just use iSender instead of iMediator. So what I'll do is I'll use iSender. So you can use either mediator or iSender, but I prefer using iSender. So I'll just map it here. and also inject it in the constructor of the controller. Once that's done, now the only thing left is we need to come here, we need to create a command here. So let's create the command. And the command will be add company command. Yeah, so we'll just create add company command, and from the request, we'll transfer the data here. Okay, for now, we are doing this manually, but this step can also be avoided, and we'll cover that up in the later tutorial. So we can use certain libraries like AutoMapper or Mapster to just map the data from two objects. Okay, so we've now created the command, and now the way to call the handler is I'll just say await underscore sender dot send, and we just pass in the command add command. Add command, and it will automatically detect from the command which handler it needs to call, and also what it needs to return. So since our command has a signature which returns a string, so if you see this, it is returning a task of string. So we can just take it as the company ID. So it returns the company ID. And you see the rest of the implementation remains as it is. So we have reduced this method to bare minimum, and this is the handler now. So let's put a breakpoint here, and let's also put a breakpoint here, and then run the project and see how it is working. So let's start the API, and let's try to create another company. So this is open. So let's move to API documentation. So we open Swagger, and let's go to post, and let's try to create a new name. So if we check our database, we have 3 companies there. Let's try to create another company and call it, say, just call it as Infosys. We can call this Pune, Maharashtra. I'll call this as India, and I'll execute it. If you see now, the request has come in. Now the job of the mediator is to handle it over to the handler. If you see now, the request has come to the handler, and if I click on continue, if you see, the company is already added. So rest of the functionality remains as it is. If you see, we have added the company. So even if you check here, it responds with this. So rest of the functionality remains the same. What we have done is we have only shifted the responsibility of doing business logic from the controller action method to the CQRS, that is the handler. Okay. And so any kinds of validations also can be done here, if you see here, duplicate company name exception. So if I try to create it again, it should give me the exception. That's the reason in the previous tutorial we had covered the flow control of exceptions, wherein it can be used not only inside the controllers, but in any layer. So now we are using it from the application layer, but we should get similar results. So if I try to just open up, so if I just try to create another company with the same name, it should prevent me from doing that and give me the required exception. So you see, now we are getting 409, which is a conflict. It says the company with name Infosys already exists. So this is the way we are also handling the errors. Okay. So now the next thing what we'll do is we have covered up command. Now let's create a query. So that is for read only operations. So we have a read only operation, which is get companies. So let's create one for that. So what I'll do is now inside queries, I will create a new folder called get company. So this always, so what I prefer is inside queries, I create a folder which gives the name of the feature. So the feature is get companies. Now inside that, I will create the uh, actual query. So let me name this query as get companies or get companies query. So let me add a class. I'll call it as company query. Let's quickly change this to a record. Public record. And what it takes in is, let's check what it takes in as a parameter. So if we go to the controller, this takes in query parameters. So let's call it as query parameters. Okay, and let's see what the return type is. So the return type would be page list of company response. Okay, so let's do that. So we'll make it inherit from iRequest interface, where it will return page list of company response. Okay, so we've created our command. Now, one thing we need to do is also let's change this company response to a record from class so that we keep it consistent. So this is basically done because all the DTOs, basically once they are created, they don't need to change. That's the reason we are preferring it as a record than as a class. And it's the main feature to use here is that it's immutable. That's the reason we prefer. And so it's also lightweight. So records basically use less amount of memory and are less CPU intensive as compared to classes. So that's the reason we prefer records for most of the DTOs. Okay, so let me just quickly change this. Let's change this to company's query. We'll change it to a record. Let's try to build and check if there's any error somewhere. There should be, because I think we had used this as an example request in some cases. Yeah, there you go. So we will need to change this. So we would just need to change this to move these errors. That's done. Now we are good to go. Yeah, there are two more places where we had used this. Let's get rid of this. This is one interesting feature which the latest versions of Visual Studio have. As soon as you do a particular thing, the IntelliSense already detects what you need to do, and then you can just tab it out so that it automatically does it for you. Okay, so I think we are good here. Let's try to build it again and check if we have any errors. Yep, so we are all clear here. So now since we have created the query, now let's go ahead and create the query handler. So get company's query handler. So we'll just create a new class. Get company's query handler. Okay. Okay, so I think I have just named it as a get company query. So let me just rename it to get company's query. So it's a good practice to maintain a consistent standard. So if you've named the command as companies, also name the command handler as companies so that it is consistent enough. So get company's query, and the handler which handles the company's query is the get company's query handler. Okay, so we are good here. Let's change this to public. Field class, and now we'll inherit from I request handler. So this takes in the get companies query and returns a page list of companies, company response. And now let's implement the interface. That's done. What I'll do is I'll just fill in the constructor, give it the constructor. Yeah. So now the next thing what we do is we go to the controller, and this thing which is there here, we can just take it off from here and can put it in the command handler. What we'll do is we will just return and paste it here. So await unit of work, public async task, and query parameters will be request dot query parameters. Okay, so we are good here. And now in the controller, we will just create the call to the handler. That is, we will just say await sender dot send, and then which command we need to create is new get companies query, not command, sorry, we need to create a query, get companies query, and we pass the query parameters here. Okay, so that's it. So we are good here. So we have transformed one query and one command. Let's check if the query is working fine. Let's start application and check if it is returning all the companies as we need, and the rest of the application should remain as it is. Let's try API documentation. Get companies, so let's fire it up. And there you go. So that's how we have now moved the logic from the controllers to the application layer by using CQRS pattern and the mediator. So that was it from this tutorial. In the next tutorials, we'll be covering up some more concepts related to this, and that is reducing the amount of content in the controllers. So basically not to have fat controllers where all the processing logic is inside the controller action methods. We'll move all other aspects like even error handling. We'll use another flow method called error, which is another library. And we'll also use a mapping library called Mapster, wherein we can then map between the objects and not create the objects manually. So that will help us reduce the amount of fat controllers. Okay, so that's it from this tutorial.